story starts where my dad took my mum's life when I was about 13. And how that happened was we went out for a picnic the day before. I woke up the next morning to my brother shaking me saying, "Pete, you got to get out of bed. Dad's just gone out of the house. Mum's dead. We've got to get out."
It came over the news that a body had been found in the Daisy Hill Forest, believed to be the remains of missing cub salesman Brian Andrews. And my children were watching TV that night, and it was just awful. They were screaming. They were talking about their daddy as a skeleton, and that's pretty scary stuff for little kids, and they were little.
We're sitting there watching the news, and it flashed up on the news that a skeleton had been found in the bush, and they put a picture of Dad.
We just screamed. I just remember my brother, who was 7 at the time, he ran up the hallway, he ran into his room, he grabbed this plane model that he'd built with Dad, and he just smashed it.
So my brother and I left the house, went up to the police station. No response there, so we drove down the road to the ambulance. They responded. So through that, the authorities turned up. My brothers, all of us, ended up turning up at the house. We learnt that Dad was sitting out in the car. The police had him because he'd gone and handed himself in at the police station. And life took a big turn from there.
Early morning, it was 6 a.m. I was at work and I'd heard that there'd been a triple murder in Toowoomba. I got a phone call from Johnny, our youngest son, JT, that something had happened at Michael's unit. We then drove into Toowoomba, as you do, thinking the worst. We had another phone call saying that we had to go to the police station instead of going to Michael's unit. It was then, when we got to the police station, that they informed us that Michael had been murdered along with 2 of his students, and that's when our world fell apart.
I was working in a bank at the time, and a man came in and held a gun to my head and threatened my life and demanded money. So I handed over the money, of course. After it happened, I took a couple of months off work. I got myself prepared to go back to work, and then the first day back at work, it happened again. And I think that's when the real impact hit me at that point, and I wasn't able to go back to that place of work. After that, I felt so insecure. I wasn't even able to go back to the shopping centre itself for quite a few years after that. Just the memories were just too raw for me. Just that sense of loss of safety and the hypervigilance. I couldn't take my children back to that same shopping centre, so I would actually divert and go to the one further away. I couldn't go to the mailbox. My whole life for the next 2 years just totally stopped.
Two boys went across the road and stole a bottle of rum, drank the rum, and then, which was one of the boys, killed Tyson, one of Michael's students, in the garage. They then went inside the unit, where killed David Lyons. Then they decided to start raping a young lady that was there in front of her 3-year-old child. Michael, being Michael, put his hand up and said, "Stop doing what you're doing to my students, my kids. Do what you want to me. but leave my kids alone. They don't need this. They don't deserve this. So they did. They tortured him for 6 hours. And then they told one of his students to then kill Michael, or he too would be killed. And honestly, if I was a 16-year-old boy and just seen what I'd seen, I don't know what I'd do either. So this young lad killed Michael. He did a few other things, but he took Michael's life. They disfigured Michael so much so that the only way we could identify Michael was by DNA. All we saw of Michael was his right hand, and that's how we said goodbye to Michael.
I didn't quite know what to expect, and I went into the Sycamore program with a lot of trepidation.
I was very hesitant about being involved in the program. I was happy for Mum to do it and happy for Michelle to be involved, and I admire them from a distance. But I didn't really see myself doing it. You know, why would you want to talk to someone who had intently taken someone else's life? You know, why? And then so as the stories came out, they told of a man who had himself lost his father to murder and who was now in jail. So as you hear that, you sort of go, I've got a connection. I've lost my father to murder. Even though I don't want to admit it, I have a connection to these people by the mere crime.
Were these people doing it for the right reasons? Were they doing it just to fill in time while they're in prison? Were we going to be, you know, just the butt of a few jokes, or were they genuine and wanting to make a difference? So at first, it was a bit scary going in there. I had been into prisons visiting, so that part of going into the prison wasn't quite so bad. But facing these people with not knowing what their expectations were was probably the daunting part.
Apprehensive at first about meeting the offenders going into jail, the actual prisons themselves, the prisoners, what they thought of us and how they would receive us in prison. And for someone who has never been in prison or seen inside of a prison, it was very confronting and scary.
You know, initially when I went in there, I was very scared, very timid. The whole correctional centre, entering a correctional centre is huge. Going through the induction is scary. So the journey for me is probably my own journey in that you get used to entering a correctional centre, which is nothing. You know, you don't think that you're ever going to get used to entering a correctional centre, but you do, you change. And you begin to see these people as people. You begin to hear their stories. You begin to hear what they've been through, how they've ended up where they are. You begin to see them as people rather than just as offenders. And the more you hear their stories, the more you can resonate with where they're at and how they're progressing. One particular person who attended the program sat there with folded arms and didn't sort of interact initially. And I was probably the same as him. You know, we were probably on the same level because I was not folding my arms, but I was timid. So as the program progressed, his arms became more and more relaxed. He became interactive with the program, and as did I. So by the end of the program, you know, he did the speech and I did the speech.
To face the offenders in prison, I found was really enlightening. They weren't horrible people. They were young men who had had terrible childhoods. Terrible things happened to them, and that's the result of their lives. have been really in an upheaval, and I wanted to mother them.
There was a part in the program called the ripple effect, and we did a practical illustration where we had a little pot of water and we dropped a stone in it, and just like on a lake, the ripple effect of the water going out as ripples until it finally either stops or gets to the very edge.
Seeing that actual visual bowl of water with the penny being dropped in, or the stone being dropped in the water, and seeing those ripples expand out was mesmerising, and it was kind of thought-provoking in terms of, well, who are those inner circles and who are the circles outside of that? And being able to document on the circles in our books around, well, who are the people that are immediately affected and those outside of that, and then the bigger picture, and then I guess looking at in terms of our years, like the first year who was affected, and the second year, and for myself, how have I been affected throughout those years, and how has it changed me? And that ripple effect goes on and on and on.
It's not just us that's affected, it's you're the extended family, and then it's your friends, and then it's the work colleagues and the community. And when you start looking at the list of people that are affected by a crime, and then it's also the offender's family, the offender's friends, the offender's work colleagues or community or neighbours. It goes out that way as well. So it goes out always. And looking at that lesson was pretty hard for us and for some of the offenders too, because it actually brought them to tears when they realised how many people had been affected by their one bad choice.
My father walked Michelle down the aisle, and I walked Belinda down the aisle. My son walked Simone down the aisle. I've only got 3 daughters. My son was proud to do it, my dad was proud to do it, I was proud to do it, but it was Brian's place to do it. And somebody stole that.
I was the first one to share my story when we went in, when the course began. And in amongst that, I'd given some thought to it, and the thing that I wanted to impart to the fellas in there was to encourage them that the separation that I'd experienced, there was a hope that they could overcome. And I did that by saying to them, well, these arms have gone around the man in love and forgiveness that put his hands around my mother's throat and took a life.
Before telling my story, I didn't think it was any big thing, but on reflection and that night after sharing my story, that was when it dawned on me, that is the absolute first time anyone's given me the time to hear me, and I've actually shared that part of myself. It was an amazing feeling, and a sense of relief, that feeling heard, validated, hearing people from inside the prison actually ponder that and reflect on that and actually respond to how I was feeling, and understanding the impacts on me was, I'll never, like, it gives me goosebumps just talking about it. It never leaves me. I always look back at that moment being quite pivotal in my recovery and my well-being in the entire process.
Having done the Sycamore Tree project, it's helped me personally because it's changed my views on what sort of people are in prison. You have this idea that only lowlifes and scum are in prison, and that's not what they are. They're people who've had, bad things happen in their lives, and they've made bad choices. And this program actually helps them change their way of thinking.
So the Sycamore Tree program has helped me see offenders as people just like us. Knowing that they're going to be released back into society, and some of them soon, it helps me to be able to reconcile myself with that they have a right to start again. Previously, I probably wouldn't have thought that. I probably would have thought keep them behind bars, keep them locked away. If we can take down those walls that we have, and not so much embrace them, but understand that they need to start again. And if we can allow them to start again without our prejudices and our presuppositions about who they are as people, they now have a clearer idea of what crime does to the victim.
And you really do see a change in them. And some of them, like in prison, you're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to talk about these things. I have seen inmates cry. I have seen them talk about these things. They are... One comes to mind who's just so remorseful. He just about breaks down every time he sees us. When you walk through the prisons, when you see these guys, and the way they come to you and respect you, if we only change one from reoffending, it is all worth it. It means that is another family that is not affected or traumatised in any way.
The most memorable moment was when a chap said, I am responsible for what I did, and I am responsible for why I'm here. In the first place, he was complaining about the justice system and saying that he shouldn't have been given murder, he should have been in there for manslaughter. And at the end of the program, he came to me and he said, I really deserve more.
What you did to me 14 years ago changed my life forever. On that day, you changed my view of the whole world. You changed who I was. I lost trust, faith, sense of self, and my security. I became anxious, fear-driven, isolated, intense, sad, angry, cautious, untrusting of others, weak, ambivalent, and scared.
I am the youngest daughter of a murdered car salesman, and with that title and that part of my identity comes great pain. I endured growing up with being stigmatised, ostracised, bullied, and belittled. The ripple effects of that act of murder 35 years ago are still prevalent today. I grew up knowing only the aftermath of murder, chaos, police investigations, media attention, and then nothing but the reality of living without an integral member of your family.
Inmates quite often give us a nice gift or cards or a nice poem, and I actually carry around a poem with me that one of the prisoners wrote because it's just so beautiful, and I keep the cards. I've kept the card that they gave us.
It was about giving victims a voice. For me, it was about providing them with the opportunity to be heard and validated and be part of the sentencing process, or be part of post-sentencing, to be actively involved in it. In the criminal justice system today, victims don't have that opportunity. We're left out of it, yet we're the ones that are affected by it. I know that victims are a focus within the Queensland government, and I guess that consensus that restorative justice is soft on crime. I would challenge that view and would encourage people in whatever way they can to be involved in restorative justice, be involved in the Sycamore Tree program and see it for what it is. And they'll realise in that involvement that's actually much harder than what they realise, and it's much harder than any other process I've ever seen. And it's the benefits that come out of that for both parties, for the prisoners, the people that have done the crime, and for those that have been harmed by the crime. The benefits are tenfold.
It's great to be able to understand that they were all young people and didn't have a good upbringing, didn't have a good start in life, didn't have someone there to put their hand on their shoulder and to help them along the way. And if I can be that person when I go in there just for the time that we're there, the short time that we're there, I would like to put my hand on their shoulder and say, I'm here for you. One of the men hugged me and said, I hope I will see you again. And I said, I hope I will see you again. And I believe that when he is out, I will see him again, and I'll be glad to have a meal with him, a cup of coffee, and welcome him into my home.
If we can just save one person from just reoffending, the money that you save is enormous, and I dare anyone to put a price on that, because that, at the end of the day, saves families the trauma that they all go through. And I've seen so much trauma, both personally and within organisations relating to crime victims. And if we can just save one, just one, it's worth it.